The plastic name tag felt cold against my chest, branding me with the single word my family had chosen: unemployed. Behind me, I heard the pitying laughter of my cousins, unaware that in less than 3 hours, every television in the room would broadcast my face to the nation. They thought I was a failure, but Time magazine had just named me Person of the Year. I did not correct them. I just waited for the truth to speak. My name is Layla Miles, and I'm 34 years old. I stood at the threshold of the grand ballroom in the downtown Hyatt, the air conditioning blasting a frigid welcome that felt less like relief from the summer heat and more like the sterile atmosphere of a preservation chamber. This was the Miles family reunion, a triennial event that functioned less as a celebration of lineage and more as a competitive audit of human worth. The lighting was amber and expensive, designed to make jewelry sparkle and flaws disappear. But as I walked toward the registration table, I knew there was no lighting trick in the world that could hide the label my family had prepared for me. The table was draped in white linen, stiff and starched. Behind it sat a hired event coordinator, a young woman who did not know the politics of the people she was checking in. She smiled a customer service smile and asked for my name. When I gave it, she riffled through the plastic badges aligned in military precision. She pulled mine out. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of confusion that a data scientist would catch, but a normal person would miss, before handing it to me. I took the badge. The plastic was cold against my fingertips. Printed in bold, sans serif block letters beneath my name was a single word. It was not a job title. It was not a company affiliation. It was a social verdict. Unemployed. My thumb brushed over the raised black ink. It was aggressive in its simplicity. I could feel the eyes of my cousins burning into the back of my floral dress. From a cluster of high-top tables near the bar, I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a giggle that was poorly smothered behind a cocktail napkin. It was the sound of delighted pity, the specific frequency of laughter that only family members can produce when they are relieved that the family failure is someone other than themselves. I did not turn around. I clipped the badge onto my chest. "Please sign the guest book, Ms. Miles," the coordinator said, sliding a heavy leather-bound volume toward me. This was not just a guest book. It was the Miles Family Legacy Ledger, a pretentious tradition started by my grandfather. Every member had a dedicated page to update their life statistics since the last gathering. I flipped it open, the heavy paper smelling of fresh ink. Page 42 belonged to my cousin Clara. The header was gold. Beneath her professionally retouched headshot, the text screamed success. Clara Miles, Senior Director of Marketing, Horizon Global. Recently acquired a 3-bedroom condo in the Seaport District. Hobbies include sailing and networking. I turned the page. Page 43. My face, cropped from a grainy photo taken at a barbecue 4 years ago, looked out with pixelated uncertainty. Beneath it, the text had been filled in by the organizing committee, my Aunt Susan, because I had failed to submit the form in time. Or rather, I had submitted it, but my answers were deemed too vague, too complex, so they had edited them down to something they could understand. Layla Miles, currently taking a break, finding direction, living in the suburbs. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive reductionism. It painted a picture of a woman floating in a void, tethered to nothing, contributing nothing. It is a nice setup this year, isn't it? I looked up. Aunt Susan was standing there, holding a glass of Chardonnay. She was the architect of this evening, the editor of the ledger, and the woman who had likely typed unemployed into the badge printer with a sigh of martyrdom. She looked at my chest, her eyes lingering on the word she had chosen. "Hello, Aunt Susan," I said, my voice steady. She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like a consolation prize. "I hope you did not mind the tag, honey. We just did not know what else to put. Freelance sounds so unstable, and we wanted to be honest. Honesty is a Miles virtue, after all." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes crinkling with a sweetness that made my teeth ache. Maybe next year you will have a company name under there, even a small one. Just something to show you are back on your feet. I looked at her. I looked at the tag. I did not tell her that at 5 o'clock this morning, while she was likely sleeping or worrying about the centerpiece arrangements. I had been on an encrypted video conference with the Ministry of Health of a West African nation. I did not tell her that the break I was taking involved coding a predictive algorithm that was currently tracking the vector spread of a hemorrhagic fever in a region where 3 million people lived. I did not tell her that the model I proposed had been accepted and was being deployed to mobile units in rural villages as we spoke. To tell her would be to break the narrative. It would require explaining that I did not work for a corporation she could look up on the stock market. It would require explaining that my salary came from grants she had never heard of. It would require validation I did not need. "We will see," I said simply. "That is the spirit," she chirped, then drifted away to greet a cousin who had just made partner at a law firm. I moved into the room, navigating the sea of relatives. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and roasted prime rib. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I walked to the bar and ordered a sparkling water with lime. "Layla, long time no see." It was Uncle Bob, a man who defined success by the size of the truck he drove. He loomed over me, smelling of scotch and peppermint. He squinted at my name tag. "Unemployed. Huh? Still? I thought you were doing some computer stuff a while back." "I am still in data, Uncle Bob," I said. "But no job, right?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the entire tri-state area to hear. "Listen, do not let it get you down. The economy is tough, although Clara seems to be killing it. Did you see her shoes? $400. Easy. But hey, some people are just built for the grind, and some are, well, homebodies. You get bored sitting at home all day?" The question was not a question. It was a judgment wrapped in a query. "I keep busy," I said. "Watching Netflix, I bet," he laughed, slapping me on the shoulder. "My daughter is the same. She is between jobs, too. Says she is finding herself." I told her. "Find yourself a job. Then find yourself." He laughed at his own joke. I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It was a mechanical action. My eyes scanned the room. I saw the way their faces changed. When they looked at Clara, who was currently holding court near the shrimp cocktail tower, their eyes lit up, their pupils dilated. They leaned in, hungry for the proximity to perceived power. They absorbed her stories about quarterly projections and marketing synergies as if she were reciting gospel. Then their gaze would slide over to me. The light in their eyes would die. The facial muscles would slacken into a mask of charitable tolerance. They looked at me and saw a void. They saw a 34-year-old woman with no husband, no corporate title, and a name tag that declared her a burden on the societal structure. They saw a cautionary tale. Study hard. Kids, or you will end up like Cousin Layla, drinking club soda and finding direction in her 30s. I felt a vibration in my clutch purse. It was my phone. A notification from the server. The data packet from the field team in the Congo Basin had just finished uploading. The initial analysis showed a 98% correlation with my prediction model. We had found the index case cluster 3 days faster than traditional methods. Lives were being saved right now. Real. Breathing human beings were receiving prophylactic treatment because of the code I wrote while sitting on my unemployed couch. I swiped the notification away. "You look tired, Layla," my cousin Jessica said, appearing at my elbow. She was holding a baby on her hip and looking at me with the aggressive sympathy of a mother who believes her life choices are the only valid ones. "Is everything okay? You know, depression is nothing to be ashamed of. When you are out of work for so long, it is easy to lose your sense of purpose." "I am fine. Jessica, just didn't sleep much last night." "Insomnia," she nodded knowingly. "Too much time to think. You need a routine. Have you thought about maybe volunteering? Just to get out of the house?" I took a sip of water. The bubbles popped sharply against my tongue. "I will look into it." I was a black box. I was recording every input. The tone of Aunt Susan's voice, the specific wording of Uncle Bob's joke, the weight of the pity in Jessica's eyes. I stored it all. I did not fight back. I did not correct the record. I did not pull out my phone and show them the dashboard that was currently monitoring health crises across 2 continents. Correction is for people who care about the opinion of the audience. I did not care about their opinion. I cared about the truth. And the truth was a slow-burning fuse. There she is. The room seemed to pivot. Clara had spotted me. She glided over, a glass of champagne held loosely in her manicured fingers. She looked immaculate. Her hair was a glossy curtain of success. She wore a tailored jumpsuit that screamed executive competence. "Layla," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that missed my cheek by 2 inches. I saw the name tag. Oh my God, Aunt Susan is brutal, isn't she? But honestly, sweetie, maybe it is the kick in the pants you need. We are all just worried about you. Mom said you are not even updating your LinkedIn anymore. I am taking a break from social media, I said. Clara laughed. It was a bright, tinkling sound. A break from social media is one thing. A break from reality is another. Look, if you need me to look at your resume, I can. We have some entry-level admin roles opening up in the logistics department. It is data entry, mostly boring, but it pays the bills. Might be good for you to get back into a structure. Thank you, Clara. I will keep that in mind. Do not be proud, Layla, she whispered, squeezing my hand. We are family. We just want you to be productive. Productive. I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I looked at the unemployed tag on my chest. I know, I said. I know you do. I let them have this. I let them build their little monument to my failure. I let them comfortably reside in the story they had written for me. It made them feel secure. It made them feel superior. It gave the reunion a structure they understood. The winner and the loser. The star and the cautionary tale. I checked my watch. It was 6 p.m. In New York City, the editors at Time magazine were making their final preparations. The embargo on the press release would lift in exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes. The broadcast would begin shortly after dinner. I took another sip of water and let the cold liquid slide down my throat. I could wait. I had waited years to find my path. I could wait 3 more hours to show them where it led. So, Clara said, turning back to the group that had gathered around us, eager to see the contrast between the 2 cousins up close. Who wants to hear about the merger? I do, Aunt Susan cried. They turned their backs to me, a wall of suits and cocktail dresses. I stood alone in the shadow of their success, fingering the plastic edge of my name tag. Unemployed. I smiled, a small, private expression that nobody saw. Just you wait. The architecture of my family's dysfunction was not built in a day. It was constructed brick by brick, over decades of Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, and quiet comparisons whispered in kitchens while the dishes were being dried. Standing in the reunion hall, watching them circulate with their cocktails, I realized that for the Miles family, love was conditional. It was a currency that fluctuated based on market value, and for as long as I could remember, my stock had been trading at an all-time low. I looked across the room at the projection screen, where a slideshow of old family photos was beginning to loop. There was a picture of Clara at 7 years old, holding a debate trophy that was nearly as large as she was. The family cheered at the image. I remembered that day. I remembered the way my grandmother had framed the photo before the ceremony was even over. My childhood home was a museum dedicated to the cult of extroverted achievement. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was lined with framed accolades, a gallery curated by my mother. It was a timeline of Clara's ascent. First place in the regional debate championship, captain of the varsity lacrosse team, student body president. Her smile in every photograph was predatory and dazzling. The smile of someone who knows exactly what the audience wants and is willing to sell it to them. My section of the wall was noticeably sparse. It was not that I lacked achievements. It was that my achievements did not translate into the language my family spoke. They spoke the language of podiums and applause. I spoke the language of variables and quiet discoveries. I remembered the spring of my 8th grade year. I had spent 4 months in the basement, building a complex logistical model using early coding software to predict local traffic patterns for a science fair project. I won first prize in the state. I came home holding the heavy blue rosette and the certificate, my heart hammering with a rare sense of pride. I found my father in the living room, watching a football game. I showed him the ribbon. He took it, turned it over in his hands, and then looked at me with a mixture of confusion and mild disappointment. "Traffic patterns," he had said, the words heavy in his mouth. "That is very technical, Layla. It reduces congestion by 18% if the lights are retimed," I explained, desperate for him to see the elegance of the solution. He handed the ribbon back to me. "You know, the cheerleading tryouts are next week. Your cousin Clara says it is a great way to meet people. You spend so much time in that basement. I think a skirt and some pom-poms would do wonders for your social life. It is more natural for a girl your age." The ribbon went into a drawer. It never made it to the wall. From that moment on, the roles were cast in iron. Clara was the protagonist, charismatic, driven, the leader of the pack. I was the supporting character, the quiet one, the one who lacked ambition, the one who needed to be managed. They labeled me low energy because I preferred reading papers on epidemiology to making small talk about the weather. They called me passive because I did not fight for the center of attention. This narrative solidified when we reached college age. Clara went to business school, a path that made sense to everyone. It was tangible. It involved suits, boardrooms, and bonuses. When she landed an internship at a major conglomerate, the entire family acted as if she had been appointed to the Supreme Court. I took a different path. When I received the acceptance letter for a full scholarship in health data science, I thought, for a brief, foolish moment, that this would finally be the thing that made them look at me with respect. A full scholarship meant that a major institution was willing to bet over $200,000 on my brain. I laid the letter on the kitchen table during breakfast. My mother picked it up, wiping her hands on her apron. She scanned the lines, her brow furrowing not with pride, but with concern. "Health data science?" she asked, looking at me over her reading glasses. "Is that like being a nurse?" "No, Mom. It is analyzing medical data to solve large-scale health problems. It is statistics and computer science applied to medicine." She put the letter down and sighed, the sound of a parent bracing for a burden. "But how much does a job like that pay, Layla? Is it stable? It sounds very niche. You know, Clara is going into marketing. Every company needs marketing. But this, are you sure you do not want to study something safer? Accounting, maybe?" The scholarship was treated like a risky gamble rather than a triumph. They could not brag about it because they did not understand it. You cannot boast to the neighbors about your daughter's proficiency in algorithmic modeling if you do not know what an algorithm is. So, they simply said, "Layla is still figuring things out." The chasm between us widened into a canyon 3 years ago. I had been working at a prestigious data firm, making a salary that would have finally satisfied my mother's need for security. But the work was soulless. I was optimizing ad clicks for pharmaceutical companies. I was miserable. When the opportunity came to co-found the Aurora Impact Lab, a nonprofit dedicated to using data to fight infectious diseases in developing nations, I did not hesitate. I quit my corporate job. I cashed out my 401k to seed the initial operations. I moved into a smaller apartment. To my family, this was not a pivot. It was a collapse. I remember the family gathering right after I resigned. The air was thick with judgment. They looked at me as if I had announced I was joining a cult. "You left a job with full benefits?" my uncle asked, his face red with the indignation of a man who worshipped insurance premiums. "In this economy?" "It is a calculated risk," I tried to explain. "We are building something that can save lives. The potential impact is massive." "Impact does not pay the rent. Layla," my mother snapped, her voice trembling. "You are 31 years old. You should be settling down, buying a house, not playing scientist with your savings. This is self-destruction." That night, I received a text message from Clara. I still have it saved on my phone, archived not out of sentiment, but as a piece of data, evidence of the specific frequency of her cruelty. She wrote, "I heard about you quitting. Look, sweetie, I know you want to be special, but you are not enough of a leader to run a project like that. You are too quiet. You crumble under pressure. Do yourself a favor and beg for your old job back before it is too late. Best to find a real job and leave the saving the world stuff to the professionals." I never replied. That was the final seal on my file. In the family registry, Clara was the success story, the golden standard against which all other cousins were measured. I was the cautionary tale. I was the lost soul. They needed this dichotomy. It made sense of their world. If Clara was the hero, someone had to be the sidekick who needed saving. If Clara was the winner, someone had to be the loser to give that victory scale and perspective. I became the dark background that made her light shine brighter. They repeated this story to themselves and to each other for years. They repeated it until it became a dogma that no one thought to question. Layla is struggling. Layla is drifting. Layla is unemployed. They never asked to see my work. They never asked for the name of my organization. When I mentioned traveling to Geneva for a conference, they assumed I was going on a vacation I could not afford. When I mentioned meeting with government officials, they assumed I was exaggerating a visit to the DMV. Confirmation bias is a powerful drug. They filtered out every piece of data that contradicted their hypothesis. They saw my simple clothes and assumed poverty, not efficiency. They saw my silence and assumed shame, not exhaustion from working 18-hour days coordinating with field teams in 3 different time zones. I looked around the reunion hall again. Clara was laughing at the center of a circle of admirers, her head thrown back, basking in the adoration. She needed me to be the failure. If I was not the failure, then her success was just normal. If I was not beneath her, then she had no one to stand on. I took a sip of my sparkling water. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. They had written a tragedy for me. They had cast me in the role of the broken woman, the disappointment. They were so certain of the script that they had not bothered to read the reviews from the rest of the world. Tonight, the play was going to change. Tonight, the audience was going to learn that while they were busy watching the stage they had built, the real show had been happening outside the theater all along. I watched the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. The countdown continued. They had their story. I had the truth. And in the battle between narrative and data, data always wins in the end. To my family, my existence was defined by what I lacked. I was 34 years old and lived in a rented 2-bedroom apartment with beige carpet and no doorman. I did not drive a leased German luxury sedan. I did not carry a key card on a retractable lanyard that would grant me access to a glass-walled skyscraper in the financial district. I did not have a framed photograph of myself shaking hands with a CEO at a holiday gala. In the visual language of the American middle class, I was a blank page, a void where a successful career should have been. They saw a woman who spent her days at home, likely in pajamas, staring at a laptop screen. They assumed I was browsing job boards or aimlessly scrolling through news feeds, paralyzed by indecision. They imagined my days were filled with long, empty hours of boredom, punctuated only by the shame of being left behind. The reality was a galaxy away from their assumptions. While my family saw an unemployed recluse, the global scientific community knew me as the co-founder and chief science officer of the Aurora Impact Lab. We were not a startup chasing an IPO. We were a specialized, high-velocity nonprofit organization designed to do one thing: weaponize data to kill epidemics before they could kill people. My home office was not a place of leisure. It was a command center. The 3 monitors on my desk were my windows into the most vulnerable corners of the earth. I did not have water cooler gossip. I had encrypted data streams flowing in from rural clinics in the Mekong Delta, sanitation reports from the favelas of Brazil, and vector migration patterns from sub-Saharan Africa. My mornings began while my parents were still in deep REM sleep. At 4 in the morning, The blue light of my screens illuminated my face as I connected with my team in Geneva and New Delhi. By the time my mother woke up to make her coffee at 7, thinking I was likely sleeping in due to a lack of purpose, I had already chaired 3 high-stakes meetings across 4 different time zones. I remember a specific Tuesday last month. My aunt had called me at 9 in the morning to ask if I wanted to join her for a mid-morning yoga class, her voice dripping with the assumption that my schedule was wide open. "I cannot make it, Aunt Susan," I had said, holding the phone to my ear with my shoulder while typing a command line that would reroute supply chain logistics for a cholera outbreak. "Oh, come on," she had wheedled. "It is not like you have a boss checking the clock. You need to get out of the house. The fresh air will do you good." She did not know that 10 minutes prior, I had authorized the deployment of a mobile testing unit to a cluster of villages where our algorithm had detected a 90% probability of a hemorrhagic fever flare-up. She did not know that my boss was the data, and the data was screaming. The system I had architected was revolutionary because it traded hindsight for foresight. Traditional epidemiology often reacted to body counts. They counted the dead to know where the virus was. My code did the opposite. We ingested terabytes of peripheral data, rainfall levels, local pharmacy purchases of fever reducers, social media keyword spikes, even fluctuations in market prices for soap. We fed this chaos into the machine, and the machine found the pattern in the noise. We could predict an outbreak up to 6 weeks before the first official hospital case was reported. 6 weeks was not just a number. 6 weeks was the difference between a manageable cluster of 20 patients and a graveyard of 5,000. I lived in 2 parallel dimensions. In one dimension, I was the architect of a digital shield that covered millions of people. I watched the map on my central monitor turn from angry red to safe green as our interventions took hold. I felt the electric hum of competence, the adrenaline of solving a puzzle that had human lives as the pieces. In the other dimension, the one where I sat at Thanksgiving dinner, I was the pity case. "So, still no luck on the job hunt?" my cousin would ask, passing the mashed potatoes. "I am working on some personal projects," I would say. "Right, personal projects," he would smirk. "My buddy is doing a personal project. He is restoring a '67 Mustang. Takes up a lot of time and money, gives nothing back. Sounds familiar?" I kept my mouth shut. I did not tell him that my Mustang had just secured a $4 million grant from a global philanthropic foundation. I did not tell him that the nothing it gave back was the continued existence of 3,000 children in a flood-ravaged province who would otherwise have died of dehydration. They looked for me on social media. The modern town square where success is performed for applause. They found a desert. My Instagram had 12 photos, mostly of landscapes or books. My LinkedIn profile was hibernated, stripped of details to protect the security of our field operatives who worked in politically unstable regions. To my family, if it was not posted, it did not happen. If there were no photos of company retreats or business class boarding passes, then the work did not exist. They saw my silence as shame. They thought I was hiding my nothingness. I was not hiding nothingness. I was hiding the weight of the world. There was one time, about 2 years ago, when I tried to bridge the gap. A prestigious medical journal had published a paper I wrote on predictive algorithmic modeling in low-resource environments. It was a dense, technical piece, full of charts and regression analyses. But it was the cornerstone of my career. I was proud of it. I printed a copy and brought it to Sunday brunch. "Mom, I wrote this," I said, handing her the stapled pages. "It was published last week." My mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and took the paper. She squinted at the title, "Nonlinear Data Aggregation in Prophylactic Vector Control." She flipped the first page. She scanned the abstract, her brow furrowed. She looked up at me, not with pride, but with a mixture of boredom and confusion. "Honey," she said, handing it back to me as if it were a piece of junk mail. I read the first paragraph. "It is gibberish. Why do you use such big words? Nobody talks like that. It is a scientific paper." "Mom, it is supposed to be precise?" "Well," she sighed, turning back to the stove. I am sure it is very smart, but can you imagine Clara putting this on the fridge? It looks like a tax audit. Why don't you write something nice, like a blog? People love blogs. That was the moment the door closed. I took the paper back. I did not argue. I did not try to explain that the gibberish she dismissed was currently being used as a textbook case study at 3 Ivy League universities. I realized then that they did not want to know me. They wanted to know a version of me that fit into their understanding of the world. They wanted a daughter who had a job title they could pronounce, a salary they could brag about, and a life they could envy. I could not give them that. I was playing a game they did not even know existed. So I let the two worlds run parallel. I let them have their unemployed Layla, the woman who needed advice on how to fix up a resume, and I kept Director Miles for the people who needed me to save their lives. I walked the line between these two identities every day. It was a lonely walk, but it was honest. I did not need their applause to know my worth. I had the data. But as I stood in the reunion hall, feeling the cold plastic of the name tag against my skin, I knew that the parallel lines were about to converge. The geometry of my life was about to be violated. They had forced the issue with their pity and their public labeling. They wanted to define me. They had no idea that the definition was already written, printed on the cover of a magazine that was currently being distributed to newsstands all over the world. The silence I had maintained was not empty. It was full, and it was about to break. The digital summons arrived exactly 1 week before the event. My phone vibrated on the desk, cutting through the silence of my home office. It was not a notification from the World Health Organization, nor was it a red flag alert from our servers in Johannesburg. It was something far more terrifying. You have been added to Miles Family Reunion 2025, Final Logistics. I stared at the screen, the group chat, the modern coliseum of passive-aggressive warfare. For the past 3 years, I had been blissfully excluded from these threads, a side effect of my perceived irrelevance. But now, with the reunion imminent, I was dragged back into the fold. The messages began to populate the screen instantly, a cascading waterfall of blue and gray bubbles. They were discussing the color palette for the napkins. They were debating whether the potato salad should be vegan or traditional. It was a frenetic display of micromanagement disguised as familial bonding. I scrolled up, catching up on the history I had missed. It was a fascinating sociological study. My family did not communicate. They broadcasted. Every message was a mini press release designed to frame the sender in the best possible light. Clara, just landed in Dubai for a quick layover. Sorry if my responses are slow. The lounge Wi-Fi is spotty. By the way, for the slideshow, please use the photo of me receiving the Golden Horizon Award, not the one from the Christmas party. The lighting was tragic at Christmas. Aunt Susan. Noted. Clara, we are so proud of you. Safe travels. Uncle Mark. Just closed the deal on the lake house. We will be hosting the after party on Sunday. Bring your swimsuits, though the water might be too cold for anyone without polar bear blood. Ha ha ha. I set the phone down and returned to my work. I was in the middle of a delicate negotiation regarding data privacy laws with a minister in Southeast Asia. I did not have the bandwidth to care about the potato salad. But an hour later, the phone buzzed again, and again, and again, a rapid-fire sequence that indicated a crisis. I picked it up. The message that sat at the bottom of the screen was an image. It was a screenshot. And judging by the frantic series of message-deleted notifications that followed it, it was never meant to be seen by the general population of the group. It was a screenshot of a smaller, exclusive group chat titled, Planning Committee, No Kids Layla. My Aunt Susan, in a moment of technological incompetence that I could only describe as divine intervention, had accidentally forwarded the screenshot to the main group instead of sending it to the caterer. The screenshot showed a conversation between Clara, Aunt Susan, and my mother. Aunt Susan. Okay, final check on the name tags. I'm printing them tonight. Layla wrote data researcher on her intake form. Do we keep that? It feels a bit vague. Clara. Please. Researcher implies she is drawing a salary or attached to a university. Let's be real. If we put that, people will ask her what she is researching, and she will mumble about computers and bore everyone to death. It creates confusion. Just put unemployed. It is accurate. It manages expectations. Mom. Oh, I don't know. That seems harsh. Maybe just between opportunities? I don't want her to cry at the buffet table. We need to keep the drama to a minimum this year. Clara. Mom, please. Between opportunities is just corporate code for fired 6 months ago and still in denial. Unemployed is clear. Freelance is just unemployed with a laptop. We are doing her a favor. If we label her clearly, people won't ask awkward questions. They will just offer her sympathy and move on. It is better for the flow of the evening. Uncle Mark. I agree with Clara. Maybe seeing it in print will light a fire under her. Tough love. She needs to see reality. Aunt Susan. Okay, unemployed it is. I will format it in bold so it is readable from a distance. I stared at the image. The text was small, but the words were heavy. They were discussing me not as a person, but as a public relations problem. I was a pothole in the smooth road of their perfect evening, something to be paved over with a label that would signal to the other guests, drive around this person, nothing to see here. Below the accidental screenshot, the main chat was in chaos. Aunt Susan. Delete. How do I delete? Aunt Susan. Wrong chat. Ignore that. Aunt Susan. Layla. Honey. That was an old draft. We were just brainstorming. I did not reply. To reply would be to give them the reaction they expected. Tears, anger, a long defensive text paragraph explaining that I was not, in fact, unemployed. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The hum of my server rack in the closet was a comforting white noise. Unemployed with a laptop, Clara had said. I looked at my laptop. It was a custom-built machine with a processor powerful enough to model the viral load of a population of 10 million in under 40 seconds. It was currently running a simulation that was being watched by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I opened the web browser and navigated to the reunion event portal. I logged in with my family credentials. I went to the profile section. There it was. Name, Layla Miles. Occupation, unemployed. The field was locked for editing by the user. Only the administrator, Aunt Susan, could change it, but there was a request change button. My cursor hovered over it. I could fix this right now. I could upload my contract. I could upload the letter from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation congratulating us on our Series B funding. I could demand they change the text to Chief Science Officer. I imagined Aunt Susan's face if I did. She would roll her eyes. She would sigh. She would change it to scientist, but tell everyone at the party. She forced me to change it. You know how sensitive she is. They would think I was inflating my title to save face. They would not believe me. The narrative was too strong. I moved the cursor away. I closed the tab. I would let them have it. I would let them print the badge. I would let them bold the font. I wanted them to commit to their mistake. I wanted the error to be physical, tangible, and undeniable. When the truth came out, I wanted them to look down at that piece of plastic and feel the weight of their own arrogance. Just as I closed the browser, a notification chimed from my encrypted email client. It was a distinct sound, a sharp ding that I had set specifically for high-priority external communications. I opened the window. From Editorial Dept, Time Magazine. Subject, Urgent. Final fact. Check and cover, layout approval, to Layla Miles. Dear Miss Miles, we are wrapping up the final edits for the Person of the Year issue. The layout team needs your final sign-off on the cover image caption. Currently, it reads, Layla Miles, the invisible architect of the global health defense. Also, please confirm the spelling of your title for the interior spread. We have you listed as co-founder and chief science officer, Aurora Impact Lab. The issue goes to print in 48 hours. The digital reveal is scheduled for Friday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We understand you will be at a family function, so we will coordinate the broadcast notification to your mobile device as discussed. Best, Sarah Jenkins, senior editor. I looked at the two screens. On the left, the family group chat, now filled with awkward gifs of cats and flowers as they tried to bury the memory of the screenshot. They were debating whether I was freelance or unemployed, arguing over which label would best minimize their embarrassment. On the right, the most influential magazine in the world was asking if Invisible Architect was a grand enough title for me. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. It was not a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of a chess player who sees checkmate 5 moves before their opponent even realizes the game has started. I typed a reply to Sarah Jenkins. The caption is perfect. Proceed. Then I picked up my phone. I opened the family group chat. I typed a single message. See you all on Friday. Looking forward to the catch-up. I hit send. Let them think I was oblivious. Let them think I was beaten. Let them think I was walking into the lion's den with no armor. They were preparing a lecture on responsibility for me. They were preparing their sympathetic head tilts and their career advice. They were getting ready to fix me. I stood up and walked to the window of my apartment. Outside, the city was moving, alive with millions of people. People who were statistically safer today because of the code I had written. My family thought I was a PR problem. They were right, but not in the way they thought. Friday night was going to be a PR disaster, but it would not be mine. It would be theirs. And unlike them, I had the receipts. I checked the weather for the reunion weekend. Clear skies, perfect visibility. Good. I wanted them to see everything. The banquet hall was vibrating with the aggressive cheerfulness that only a room full of people trying to outdo one another can produce. We had moved from the cocktail hour to the seated dinner, a transition that involved the scraping of 400 chairs against the parquet floor and the synchronized unfolding of 400 stiff linen napkins. I sat at table 9, which I quickly deduced was the designated island of misfit toys. My table mates included a cousin who had recently dropped out of divinity school to become a DJ, a distant aunt who smelled strongly of mothballs and judgment, and 2 teenagers who were aggressively texting under the tablecloth. The lights dimmed, casting long, dramatic shadows across the centerpieces. A spotlight hit the podium at the front of the room, where my mother's cousin, Uncle Jerry, stood holding a microphone. Jerry was a used car dealership owner who treated every family interaction like a sales pitch he was closing. He tapped the microphone, a sharp screech of feedback cutting through the chatter. "Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Miles family reunion," Jerry boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Look at us. Another 3 years. Another few pounds heavier, right?" A polite ripple of laughter moved through the room. "But seriously," Jerry continued, loosening his tie, "we have had a banner year in this family. I mean, look around. We have new babies. We have new houses. We have folks who just made vice president at the bank. We have entrepreneurs starting new businesses." He paused for comedic effect, his eyes scanning the room until they landed, inevitably, on table 9. "And of course, we have a few folks who are still proudly keeping the couch warm. We have got the full spectrum of the economy right here in this room." The room erupted. It was not a gentle chuckle. It was a roar. Heads turned toward me. I felt the collective gaze of my lineage hit me like a physical wave. Beside me, the DJ cousin muttered something about capitalism being a scam. But I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my face a mask of polite neutrality. The joke was at my expense, but the currency they were paying with was ignorance. I could afford the tax. "All right, let's get to the highlights," Jerry shouted. "Roll the tape." The projector screen descended from the ceiling with a mechanical whir. The slideshow began. This was the centerpiece of the evening, a montage of success carefully curated to make everyone feel inadequate. First came the babies, giant high-definition photos of infants that drew collective awes from the audience. Then came the graduations, teenagers in caps and gowns holding diplomas. Then came the career milestones. When Clara's slide appeared, the room actually gasped. It was a professional shot of her standing in a glass-walled boardroom, pointing at a graph that trended sharply upward, The text overlay was in gold. Serif font. Clara Miles, promoted to Senior Director, led the Q3 Marketing Initiative, Horizon Global Top Performer. The applause was thunderous. It was the kind of applause usually reserved for war heroes or people who have just cured a minor disease. Clara stood up at table 1, the power table, and waved. Her smile practiced and perfect. She looked like a benevolent queen acknowledging her subjects. My mother clapped so hard her bracelets jangled. My father beamed, nodding to the man next to him as if to say, "Yes, that is our bloodline." The slide held on the screen for 10 seconds, allowing everyone to absorb the magnitude of her corporate ascendancy. Then the slide changed. The music, which had been an upbeat pop song, seemed to drag for a second. On the screen was a photo of me. It was old, taken perhaps 5 years ago at a picnic, the resolution grainy and poor. My hair was windblown, and I was looking away from the camera. Beneath it, in a plain, white, sans serif font that looked like it had been typed by a bored administrative assistant, were the words, "Lila Miles, currently taking a break, finding direction." The applause died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. A few polite, scattered claps echoed in the silence, sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was the sound of pity. I did not look down. I did not shrink. I stared straight at the screen, studying the pixels, finding direction. The irony was so rich it was almost choking me. At that exact moment, the predictive model I had built was directing the logistical flow of 3 tons of medical supplies into a quarantine zone. I had more direction in my little finger than most people had in their entire careers. But on that screen, I was a leaf floating on a pond. "Okay, moving on," Jerry said quickly, sensing the awkwardness. "Let's give it up for everyone finding their path." The slide flipped to a picture of a cousin who had run a marathon. The applause returned, relieved to be celebrating something tangible again. Waiters began to circulate, dropping plates of rubbery chicken and lukewarm asparagus in front of us. The noise level rose as people began to eat, but the atmosphere at my table had shifted. The air around me felt heavy with unspoken questions. A young cousin, Emily, who was currently a sophomore in college, leaned across the centerpiece. She looked at me with wide, doe-like eyes filled with terrifying sincerity. "So, Layla," she began, her voice lowered to a whisper, "did you lose your job a long time ago? Or was it recent?" She assumed I had been fired. In her world, people did not leave jobs unless they were forced out. "I left my previous role about 3 years ago." "Emily," I said, cutting my chicken. 3 years? She blinked, horrified. "Oh my God, that is so long. Have you tried Indeed? My roommate found a job dog walking on there. It is not much money, but it is, like, something to do." "I am good, thank you," I said. Uncle Mark, who was sitting 2 seats down, leaned in. He had already consumed 3 glasses of the house red wine, and his cheeks were flushed. Mark was a man who believed that every life problem could be solved with a firm handshake and a lack of sleep. "You know what the problem is?" Mark announced, pointing his fork at me. "It is this safety net culture. In my day, if you didn't work, you didn't eat. Simple as that. Layla, listening to me? Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom. You need to feel the panic. That is where the hunger comes from. Right now, you are too comfortable. You are letting your parents support you, right?" I was not. I had paid off my parents' mortgage 2 years ago as an anonymous Christmas gift through a shell trust, so they would not know it was me. I paid my own rent. I funded my own research. "I am managing, Uncle Mark," I said calmly. "Managing is not thriving," he declared, slamming his hand on the table. "You need to get out there, flip burgers, scrub floors, whatever it takes. Build character. Look at Clara. That girl never stops. She is a shark. You are, well, you are floating." "Floating is a valid state of being," the DJ cousin muttered, but Mark ignored him. A woman I vaguely recognized as a second cousin twice removed. A woman named Martha who wore a hat indoors. chimed in from across the table. 3 years is a very long time for a woman your age. Dear, she said, her voice trembling with antiquated concern. If the career thing isn't working out, have you thought about settling down? You know, marriage provides a lot of stability. There is no shame in being a homemaker. My neighbor has a son. He is divorced, but he is a manager at the grocery store. Very steady. I could introduce you. The assumption was breathtaking, because I had no corporate title. I was therefore a resource waiting to be acquired by a man with a steady paycheck. I was a liability looking for an asset to attach myself to. I am not looking to get married right now, Martha, I said. I am focused on my work. Work? Mark laughed. A sharp barking sound. What work? The slide said you are finding yourself. That is not work. Honey, that is a vacation. I looked toward the head table. My father was standing there, talking to Uncle Jerry. I saw Jerry gesture toward me, laughing. My father looked uncomfortable. He rubbed the back of his neck. I could read his lips from across the room. Yeah, well, my father said, his face tight. She says she is doing something with data. I don't know. I don't get it. She sits on the computer a lot. It is what it is. He did not defend me. He did not say, "My daughter is brilliant." He apologized for me. He distanced himself from the embarrassment of my ambiguity. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. It was not sadness. Sadness is a soft emotion. This was calcification. It was the final hardening of my heart against their approval. I was recording every word, every look, every slight. I was archiving the data of their doubt. I took a sip of water. The room was loud. A cacophony of people bragging about their leases and their promotions. They were peacocks screaming at each other, desperate to prove their feathers were the brightest. My eyes drifted to the corner of the room. There was a large flat-screen television mounted high on the wall, currently muted and tuned to a national news network. It was background noise, ignored by everyone in the banquet hall. They were too busy watching the slideshow of their own glory to look at the world outside. On the screen, a graphic was spinning. The familiar red border of Time magazine appeared. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read in bold, scrolling letters. Coming up in 10 minutes, the exclusive reveal of the Person of the Year, a special broadcast. I checked my watch. It was 7:50 in the evening. In 10 minutes, the broadcast would interrupt the scheduled programming. In 10 minutes, the face that was currently being pitied at Table 9 would be projected into millions of living rooms across the country. Clara was standing up again, moving to the microphone to give a speech about gratitude and hustle. The room quieted down to listen to her wisdom. Success is not an accident, Clara said into the microphone, her voice amplified and confident. It is a choice. You have to wake up every day and choose to be somebody. I watched the TV screen. The countdown clock on the news channel hit 9 minutes. You have to be visible, Clara continued. You have to make your mark. I took a bite of the cold chicken. It tasted like ash, but I chewed it slowly. Some people wait for things to happen, Clara preached, gesturing vaguely in the direction of my table. And some people make things happen. I looked at the TV. The anchor was teasing the segment now. A silhouette of the winner was shown. It was a silhouette of a woman in a blazer, standing in front of a wall of monitors. I recognized the silhouette. I recognized the blazer. It was the one I was wearing right now, draped over the back of my chair. Thank you, Clara said, and the room burst into applause again. They clapped for the illusion. They clapped for the noise. I wiped my mouth with the napkin. The data set was complete. The experiment was about to conclude. The variables had all been accounted for. The control group, my family, had behaved exactly as predicted. They had underestimated the quiet anomaly in the data set. I watched the seconds tick down on the screen in the corner. 5 minutes. Nobody else was looking. They were all looking at Clara. Enjoy the spotlight, cousin, I thought, my pulse steady, my breathing calm. Enjoy it while it lasts, because the news cycle is about to change. The chatter at the table washed over me like a tide of lukewarm water. They were dissecting the lives of people they barely knew, speculating on the failures of neighbors and the triumphs of celebrities. I sat in the center of their noise, a silent observer. But in my mind, I was traveling. I was drifting back through the timeline of the last 3 years, visiting the places where I had actually lived while my family was busy constructing my imaginary cage of unemployment. "I bet she's just at home watching Netflix all day," Uncle Mark had said earlier, laughing as he speared a piece of broccoli. "You know how it is. You start one season, and suddenly it is Tuesday." The memory of his voice faded, replaced by the roar of a diesel generator in a sweltering tent in the Central African Republic. I was not watching television. I was standing in a field hospital that smelled of bleach and red dust. The air was so thick with humidity, it felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. I was wearing a vest with logistics coordinator stenciled on the back, sweat dripping down my spine. "The server is down," a French doctor had screamed, panic edging his voice. "We cannot track the patient intake for Sector 4. "I am rerouting the connection through the satellite uplink," I had replied, my fingers flying across a keyboard covered in a thin film of grit. "Give me 30 seconds. I had not slept in 24 hours. My eyes were burning. Outside the tent, the line of people waiting for screening stretched for half a mile. I was not consuming entertainment. I was the only thing standing between order and chaos for a medical team trying to process 500 patients a day. I was rewriting the intake code on the fly to handle the load. When the connection stabilized and the green lights flickered back on, the doctor looked at me with a gratitude that no corporate bonus could ever buy. But to Uncle Mark, I was just a girl on a couch, clicking next episode. The scene shifted. She never posts anything on Facebook. My cousin Jessica had complained during the appetizers. "It is weird. If you are doing something with your life, you post it. If you are silent, it means you have nothing to show." I closed my eyes and saw the auditorium in Geneva. It was the International Summit on Pathogen Tracking. The room was a cavernous hall of polished wood and glass, filled with 2,000 of the brightest minds in epidemiology and data science. The air conditioning was humming quietly. I stood at the podium, a laser clicker in my hand. Behind me, a screen the size of a movie theater projected a slide with my name in 10-foot-tall letters. Layla Miles, keynote speaker. I was not posting a selfie with a latte. I was explaining a novel algorithm for predicting viral vectors in urban environments. The data suggests that water supply contamination precedes symptomatic reporting by 72 hours. I told the room. My voice was amplified, steady, and commanding. Every person in that audience, Nobel laureates, government ministers, heads of NGOs, was taking notes. I looked out at the sea of faces. There were no likes or heart reactions here. There was only the heavy, respectful silence of people who understood that what I was saying would change global policy. But to Jessica, because it did not happen on a timeline she could scroll through while waiting for her nails to dry, it did not happen at all. The memory dissolved into another. She is just a bit lost. My mother had told her bridge club, her voice dropping to a whisper so the neighbors would not hear the shame. She is trying to find her direction. You know how millennials are. I was standing on a dirt road in a remote province in Southeast Asia. The sun was beating down on my neck. I was not lost. I was holding a tablet, surrounded by a group of 20 local nurses. They were wearing faded blue scrubs and looking at me with intense focus. "You do not need to type the name," I was saying, demonstrating on the screen. "Just tap the icon, red for fever, blue for respiratory. It uploads automatically even if the signal drops." I was teaching them how to use the app I had designed. I was giving them a tool that would allow them to report outbreaks from villages that were not even on the map. I was building a digital nervous system for a region the rest of the world had forgotten. A man in a suit, a high-ranking official from the Ministry of Health, stood off to the side, watching me. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "You designed this entire architecture?" he asked me during a break. "Yes, sir," I said, drinking from a warm water bottle. He looked at me, scanning my face, looking for the lines of age that should have accompanied such authority. "How old are you, Ms. Miles?" 33, I said. He shook his head, a look of bewildered respect on his face. 33, and you are controlling the initial response system for the entire relief program in my department. People your age are still fetching coffee for the directors. Data does not care about age, sir, I had said. It only cares about accuracy. My mother thought I was wandering without a compass. She did not know that I was the one drawing the map. The dinner table conversation drifted back into focus. Aunt Susan was talking about Clara again. "Maybe we can get Layla a part-time job at the mall for the holidays," she suggested helpfully. "They always need gift wrappers. It would be good for her to have some pocket money." I took a sip of my water, hiding the smile that threatened to break my stoic mask. Gift wrapping. 2 months ago, I sat in a mahogany-paneled conference room in Washington, D.C. Across from me sat 3 representatives from a global philanthropic alliance. On the table lay a contract thick enough to be a novel. "This grant will fund the expansion of the Aurora Impact Lab for the next 5 years, the lead representative said, sliding the papers toward me. "Your pilot program reduced the detection time for the outbreak from 6 weeks to 6 days. That is unprecedented. Ms. Miles, you have effectively bought us time, and in our business, time is the only currency that matters. 6 weeks to 6 days. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. I signed my name, Lila Miles. That signature authorized the transfer of $12 million in operational funding. It secured the jobs of 45 staff members. It guaranteed that thousands of people would receive vaccines before they even knew they were at risk. I handed the contract back. "We will have the new nodes online by January," I said. Gift wrapping, I thought, looking at Aunt Susan. She was cutting her chicken with delicate, precise strokes, completely unaware that the niece she wanted to send to the mall had recently negotiated a deal that had been briefed to the president. And then there was the image that held the most power for me. It was not a grand conference or a government contract. It was a quiet moment. My family thought I was detached. They thought I was cold, hiding behind screens because I could not connect with people. I remembered a village in the Amazon basin. We had no electricity. My laptop was dead. The language barrier was thick. I needed to explain to the village matriarchs how the water currents were carrying the bacteria from the upper river to their wells. I did not have my algorithms. I did not have my slide deck. I knelt in the red dust. I took a piece of blue chalk and a piece of white chalk from my pack. I began to draw on the ground. I drew the river. I drew the wells. I used the white chalk to show the sickness moving through the blue water. The women gathered around me. They squatted in the dirt, their colorful skirts fanning out around us. I looked into their eyes. I pointed to the drawing. I mimed the flow of water. I used the few words of their dialect I had learned. There was a moment of confusion, and then, suddenly, a spark. The matriarch nodded. Her eyes widened. She grabbed the chalk from my hand and added to the drawing, correcting my map of the river, showing me where the seasonal streams flowed. We communicated, we connected, in the dust of a jungle clearing. We built a model together that would save their village. I held the hand of the matriarch, her skin rough and warm against mine. There was no pity in her eyes. There was only partnership. I looked around the banquet hall. These people, my blood relatives, were strangers to me. They saw a cardboard cutout of a person. They saw Unemployed Layla. And the tragedy was not that they did not know. The tragedy was that the information was there. Every paper I published was open access. Every conference I spoke at was live-streamed. The Aurora Impact Lab website listed my bio on the front page. If they had typed my name into a search engine just once in the last 3 years, they would have seen it all. They would have seen the headlines. Data scientist Lila Miles revolutionizes vector tracking, the woman who predicts pandemics. But they never searched. They never typed my name because they thought they already knew the answer. They were so in love with their version of me, the failure, the cautionary tale, that they never bothered to check if it was still true. They preferred the lie. It was comfortable. It made them feel big. I looked at the television screen again. The commercial break was ending. The music for the special broadcast was starting. The intro sequence was flashy, full of rotating globes and serious-looking journalists. I sat back in my chair. The contrast between the dusty reality of my life and the sterile luxury of this room was about to collapse. The wall between what they believed and what was true was about to be demolished by a broadcast signal. "Is that the news?" someone at the table asked, glancing at the TV. "Why is it so loud?" "I think it is a special report," another cousin said, disinterested. "Probably politics," Aunt Susan sighed. "Let's ignore it. So, Layla, about the gift wrapping." I looked at her. I really looked at her. "I do not think I will have time for gift wrapping this year. Aunt Susan," I said softly. "Oh, you never know," she said, patting my hand. "You might find you enjoy the structure." "I have plenty of structure," I said. The anchor on the screen looked into the camera. "Good evening. Tonight, Time magazine reveals its choice for Person of the Year, a choice that honors the quiet, invisible work that saves millions." The volume on the TV seemed to cut through the din of the room. A few heads turned. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. The duality was over. The parallel lines were meeting, and the crash was going to be deafening. 3 months before I sat at table 9 picking at a plate of cold, rubbery chicken. My phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans, analyzing a spike in fever reports from a rural district in Brazil. The caller ID displayed a generic New York area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a telemarketer or a political survey, but something, perhaps a lingering instinct from my days in the corporate world, made me answer. "This is Layla," I said, my eyes still scanning the lines of code on my monitor. "Ms. Miles, this is Sarah Jenkins from Time magazine. Do you have a moment?" I stopped typing. Time magazine. My first thought was that they were fact-checking a quote. I had given a brief interview to a science reporter 6 months prior about the importance of open-source data in humanitarian crises. But that story had long since run. "I have a moment," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I am calling to inform you that the editorial board has finalized its selection process," Sarah said, her voice professional and crisp. "You have been shortlisted for the Person of the Year. In fact, Ms. Miles, you are not just on the shortlist, you are the selection." The silence in my apartment was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator compressor humming in the kitchen. "I think you have the wrong number," I said. "I am a data scientist. I run a nonprofit. I am not a head of state. I am not a celebrity. I am certainly not the Person of the Year." Sarah laughed softly. "That is exactly the point. Ms. Miles, this year, the board decided to focus on the guardians, the people who built the invisible walls that held the world together while everyone else was panicking. Your work with the Aurora Impact Lab, the predictive modeling, the resource allocation, it changed the trajectory of the recovery. The data is undeniable." My stomach turned over. It was not excitement. It was dread. I did not want this. I had built my career in the shadows for a reason. Anonymity was a strategic asset. It allowed me to move into politically sensitive regions without carrying the baggage of Western celebrity. It allowed me to negotiate with warlords and ministers who cared about results, not headlines. Being plastered on the cover of a global magazine would turn me into a symbol. And symbols, heavy things to carry. "I have to decline," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Excuse me?" "I cannot accept," I said, my voice firm. "It will complicate our operations. We have teams in areas where American media attention is a liability. I appreciate the honor, truly, but I have work to do." "Ms. Miles," Sarah said, her tone shifting from congratulatory to persuasive. "I understand your hesitation, but I want you to think about the platform. This is not just a photo op. This is legitimacy. This is leverage. How hard do you have to fight for funding right now? How many doors are closed to you because people do not understand what algorithmic epidemiology is? She had found the weak point in my armor. We estimate that the Person of the Year distinction generates, on average, a 400% increase in direct donations for nonprofit recipients. She continued. It brings governments to the table. It turns no into maybe and maybe into signed. You can decline, of course, but consider what that visibility could buy for the people you are trying to save. I looked at the map on my screen. I looked at the red clusters in Brazil. I thought about the generator that had failed in the Congo last week because we could not afford a replacement. I thought about the vaccine shipment that was currently sitting in a customs warehouse in Jakarta because we could not pay the expedited bribe, or the processing fee, as they called it. 400%. That was not ego. That was logistics. That was life and death. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash. I will do it, but on my terms, no sensationalism. We stick to the science. Agreed, Sarah said. We will need to schedule a photo shoot and an interview. And Ms. Miles, the embargo is strict. You cannot tell anyone, not your staff, not your friends. We announce on December 11th. December 11th. I looked at the calendar on my wall. December 11th was circled in red marker. Miles' family reunion. 6:00 p.m. A laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a dark, dry sound. Of course, the universe was not without a sense of irony. The night my family would gather to collectively mourn my lack of ambition was the same night the world would declare me its most important person. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time. The secret felt heavy in my pocket, like a stone. My first instinct, the instinct of the daughter I used to be, was to call my mother. I wanted to pick up the phone and say, "Mom, you won't believe this. I did it. I finally did something you can brag about. You can put this magazine on the fridge. You can tell the neighbors." I reached for the phone. My thumb hovered over her contact name. And then I stopped. I let my hand drop. I began to replay the tape of the last 10 years. I rewound the memories, looking for a precedent, looking for a moment where telling them the truth had actually worked. I remembered the Christmas of 2018. I had just been promoted to lead analyst at my old firm. I tried to explain it over dinner. "I am managing a team of 5 now," I had said, proud. "That is nice, honey," my mother had replied, not looking up from the turkey she was carving. "Oh, Clara, did you say your boyfriend was looking for a new car?" The conversation had pivoted instantly. My promotion evaporated like mist. I remembered the time I tried to explain my decision to launch Aurora. I had prepared a pitch deck. I wanted them to understand the vision. I sat them down in the living room. "This is not just a charity," I had said. "It is a data company." "But how do you make money?" my father had interrupted after the first slide. "We get grants. We license the software to governments." "Sounds risky," he grunted, turning back to the television. "I wouldn't quit your day job if I were you." I remembered the hundreds of times I had started a sentence only to be cut off by an anecdote about a cousin's wedding or a neighbor's renovation. I remembered the glazed look in their eyes whenever I used a word that had more than 3 syllables. I remembered the way they nodded with that patronizing smile, the one that said, "That is nice, dear. Now let the adults talk." I realized, sitting in the silence of my office, that communication requires a receiver. I had been broadcasting into the void for a decade. They had tuned me out long ago. They had decided who I was, the quiet one, the slow one, the one who needed help, and no amount of data was going to change that frequency. If I told them now, what would happen? They wouldn't believe me. That was the first hurdle. They would think I was exaggerating, or that I had fallen for a scam. Time magazine? Are you sure it is not Time for Kids, or a local newsletter? Or worse, they would believe me, and they would immediately make it about themselves. The narrative would shift instantly. Suddenly, my success would be their success. We always knew she was special. We supported her through the hard times. They would rewrite history to include themselves in the victory lap of a race they had tried to convince me to quit. I did not want their validation, not anymore. Validation from people who do not understand you is cheap. It is like being complimented on your shoes by someone who is blind. But there was a deeper question here, a question of ethics. Was it cruel to stay silent? Was I setting them up for humiliation? I imagined the scene at the reunion, the badge, the jokes, the pity. If I warned them, I could save them from that. I could spare Aunt Susan the embarrassment of printing Unemployed on plastic. I could spare my father the awkward apologies to his brothers. But then I thought, why do they need to be saved? They had written the script. They had cast the roles. All I was doing was following their stage directions. They wanted me to be silent? Fine, I would be silent. They wanted me to be the unemployed cousin? Fine, I would wear the badge. I was not lying to them. I was simply honoring the reality they had insisted upon. If I told them, I would be doing it to manage their emotions, to smooth the waters, to make them feel comfortable. I had spent my entire life making them feel comfortable with my mediocrity, so they would not have to grapple with my complexity. I was done making them comfortable. I looked at the phone again. No, I whispered to the empty room. I would not tell them. I would not give them the courtesy of a preview. I would not give them the chance to prepare their reactions or sanitize their past comments. I wanted them to experience the truth in its rawest form. I wanted the dissonance to hit them like a physical blow. It was not revenge. Revenge is active. Revenge is slashing tires or spilling wine. This was not that. This was a mirror. I was going to hold up a mirror, and for the first time in their lives, they were going to have to look at their own reflection. They were going to have to see how wrong they were, not because I argued with them, but because the world outside their little bubble contradicted them. I pulled up my email client. I opened the message from Sarah Jenkins, attached the signed release forms. Dear Sarah, the forms are attached. I confirm my availability for the December 11th broadcast. I will be attending a family function that evening, but I will have my phone on me. Let the record show. Best, Layla. I hit send. The email whooshed away. The die was cast. I did not feel giddy. I did not feel malicious. I felt a profound sense of calm. It was the calm of a scientist who has set the parameters of an experiment and now simply has to wait for the results. I closed the email tab. I minimized the browser. On my desktop, the terminal window was still blinking. The cursor pulsed, waiting for a command. I had work to do. The warning module for the cholera tracking system had a bug in the latency script. If I didn't fix it, the data from the remote sensors would be delayed by 12 minutes. In an epidemic, 12 minutes is an eternity. I cracked my knuckles. I leaned forward. Okay, I said to the machine. Let's fix this. I began to type. The click-clack of the mechanical keyboard filled the room. A rhythmic, steady sound. It was the sound of my life. It was the sound of competence. It was the sound of a woman who did not need a name tag to know who she was. Let them have their reunion. Let them have their jokes. Let them have their stories. I had the code, and in 3 months, the code would be the only thing that mattered. The waiters were clearing the dinner plates, replacing the remnants of prime rib with delicate porcelain saucers of tiramisu. The smell of dark roast coffee and cocoa powder began to drift through the banquet hall, signaling the end of the meal and the beginning of the heavy, drowsy satisfaction that usually accompanies a family gathering. At the front of the room, the large television screen, which had been ignored for the better part of 2 hours, suddenly shifted. The commercial break ended. The generic news jingle was replaced by a deep, orchestral swell, the kind of music designed to induce a sense of historical gravity. The volume, previously a low hum, seemed to spike, cutting through the clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation. And now, the voice of the news anchor boomed, resonant and authoritative. The moment the world has been waiting for. At table 1, Clara was in the middle of a story about her recent business trip to Zurich. She paused, holding her dessert spoon in midair, and glanced at the screen with a look of mild amusement. "Oh, right," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the lull. "The person of the year, I bet it is another tech CEO, or maybe a politician. They always pick someone safe." "Probably the president," Uncle Mark grunted, loosening his belt. "Or Elon," a cousin shouted. "It is always Elon." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded in my lap. I could feel the pulse in my wrist, steady and slow, like a metronome counting down the final seconds of a demolition timer. "This year," the anchor said, leaning into the camera, "the editors of Time have chosen a different path. They have chosen to honor the invisible." The graphic on the screen began to spin, a digital globe resolving into focus. "In a year defined by crisis," the anchor continued, "one person stood between the world and catastrophe. One person built the architecture that saved tens of millions of lives, all while remaining virtually unknown to the public." The room was still noisy. People were laughing, asking for cream for their coffee, shifting in their chairs. They were not listening. They were hearing, but they were not listening. Then, the screen cut to black. A single heartbeat of silence from the television speakers. And then, the cover appeared. It was massive. It filled the entire 60-inch screen. The famous red border framed the image. In the center of the frame stood a woman. She was not wearing a ball gown. She was not wearing a power suit. She was wearing a simple charcoal blazer over a black t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a practical, no-nonsense ponytail. Her arms were crossed, not in defiance, but in readiness. Behind her, a wall of monitors glowed with complex data maps, webs of red and blue lines tracing the globe. Her face was unsmiling. Her eyes looked directly into the lens with a piercing, terrifying intelligence. The headline across her chest read, "The Guardian." And beneath it, in bold, capital letters, Layla Miles. The reaction in the room was not immediate. It rippled outward from the television like a shockwave. The people closest to the screen stopped moving first, then the people behind them, then the people at the back. It happened in slow motion. I watched the realization hit them. I saw the moment the image on the screen registered in their brains and collided with the image they held in their heads. The cognitive dissonance was so violent it was almost physical. Silence descended on the banquet hall. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the sound of 400 people simultaneously forgetting how to breathe. The clinking of forks stopped. The chewing stopped. The laughter evaporated. Then, a single sound shattered the quiet. Clang. Clara's spoon slipped from her fingers. It hit the edge of her saucer and bounced onto the table, spinning loudly on the hard surface before coming to a rest. She was staring at the television. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the face of the woman on the screen, the face that was identical to the one sitting at table 9. The broadcast did not wait for them to catch up. "Layla Miles," the anchor said, his voice filled with reverence. "A data scientist who operates in the shadows, the founder of the Aurora Impact Lab. While governments argued, she acted." The screen cut from the cover to a montage of footage. There was a shot of me walking through a muddy airfield in South Sudan, wearing heavy boots and a flak jacket, flanked by UN peacekeepers. The wind was whipping my hair across my face, but I was shouting instructions to a pilot, pointing at a crate of medical supplies. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of air. Cut to the next shot. Me, sitting at a long table in a gilded room, likely a government palace. I was the only woman at the table. I was the only person not wearing a tie. I was standing up, pointing at a projection, lecturing a room full of generals and ministers. They were listening to me with rapt attention. "She designed the algorithm that predicted the path of the hemorrhagic fever outbreak 6 weeks before the first case was confirmed," the voiceover said. Cut to the next shot. Me, exhausted, sleeping on a cot in a field tent, a laptop still balanced on my chest. "She does not do it for fame," the anchor said. "She does not do it for money. She does not have a publicist. She simply has the code." At the head table, Aunt Susan was trembling. I could see her hand shaking as she reached for her water glass. She knocked it over. The water spilled across the white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric, but she did not move to clean it up. She just stared at the screen. "That," she whispered. Her voice was thin, barely audible in the silence. "That is that Layla?" She looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen, then back to me. I did not move. I did not smile. I sat with the same posture as the woman on the cover. I let the resemblance be the answer. Uncle Mark, the man who had told me to flip burgers to build character, looked like he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. His face was a mask of confusion. He looked at my father. "Did you know?" Mark mouthed. My father was frozen. He was staring at the television with a look I had never seen on his face before. It was not pride. It was fear. It was the realization that he had been living in a house with a stranger. "No," my father whispered. "I didn't." Clara was the first to move. It was a frantic, desperate motion. She grabbed her smartphone from the table. Her fingers flew across the screen. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was typing my name. For years, she had likely never typed Layla Miles into a search bar. Why would she? She knew who I was. I was the unemployed cousin. I was the failure. I watched her face as the results loaded. The blue light of the phone screen illuminated her panic. She scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. She saw the articles, the New York Times, The Woman Who Saved Brazil, The Lancet, Miles's Algorithm and the Future of Epidemiology, BBC World Service, an exclusive interview with the ghost of the data world, Forbes, the most influential scientists under 40. She saw the dates, 2022, 2023, 2024. She saw the awards I had declined to pick up. She saw the grants I had won. She saw the photos of me with people she had only seen on the news. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. Her perfect, confident facade was cracking. The narrative she had built, the story where she was the sun and I was the shadow, had just been obliterated. She wasn't the sun. She was just a person with a job title. I was the gravity holding the system together. "You," Clara stammered. Her voice broke. "You have been—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The television anchor was wrapping up. Layla Miles, a reminder that true power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Layla Miles is Time's Person of the Year." The screen returned to the cover image. My face, 10 feet tall, staring down at the family that had pitied me. The silence in the room stretched out, agonizing and perfect. No one knew what to say. There was no protocol for this. There was no greeting card for, "Sorry we treated you like a loser when you were actually saving the world." I slowly uncrossed my hands. I looked down at my chest. Pinned to my dress was the plastic rectangle, the badge Aunt Susan had printed, the badge Clara had insisted upon. Layla Miles, Unemployed. I reached up. My fingers unclipped the safety pin. The sound was small, a tiny metal click, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. I held the badge in my hand for a moment. I ran my thumb over the bold letters one last time. Then, very gently, I placed it on the table. I placed it face down. I smoothed the tablecloth around it. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I took a sip. I looked up and met Clara's eyes. I did not say a word. I did not need to. The truth had spoken, and its voice was louder than any of them could ever hope to be. The name tag lay there, a piece of plastic trash, while the woman on the screen watched over us all. The silence that had fallen over the banquet hall did not last. It shattered like a dropped glass, replaced instantly by a chaotic, rushing noise that sounded like air escaping a vacuum. The shock had worn off, and the reality was setting in, triggering a frantic, desperate need for context. I watched them come at me. It was a physical wave. My mother was the first to move, scrambling out of her chair at table 1, nearly tripping over the hem of her dress. My father followed, his face a pale mask of bewilderment. Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, and Clara were right behind them, pulled toward table 9 by the magnetic force of the revelation. They surrounded the table, the other misfit toys at my table, the DJ cousin and the teenagers, scooted their chairs back, wide-eyed, sensing that they were in the blast radius of a family nuclear event. "Layla!" my mother gasped, gripping the back of my chair. Her knuckles were white. Her eyes were searching my face as if looking for a stranger hiding behind my skin. "Layla, what is this? What is happening? Is that really you on the television?" "It is me, Mom," I said. My voice was calm, a flat line amidst their spiking heart rates. But why did you hide it?" she cried, her voice pitching up into a wail that drew stares from the entire room. "Why didn't you tell us? We have been so worried. We thought you were doing nothing." "I did not hide it," I said. I turned my chair slightly so I could look her fully in the face. "I never hid anything. I have been working under my own name for 3 years. The information was not classified. It was not secret. It was public record." "But we didn't know," Aunt Susan interjected, pressing a hand to her chest. "How could we not know that our own niece was a person of the year?" I looked at Aunt Susan. I looked at the wet stain on the tablecloth where she had spilled her water. "You did not know because you never asked," I said. "You asked me when I was getting married. You asked me why I did not have a company car. You asked me if I was depressed. But you never once asked me what I was actually working on. You never asked about the data. You never asked about the mission. You stopped listening the moment you decided I did not fit your definition of success." My father stepped forward. He looked smaller than I remembered. The bluster he usually carried, the confidence of a man who believed he understood how the world worked, was gone. "Layla," he said, his voice rough. We didn't understand. You said it was data. You said it was research. You didn't say it was this." "I told you I was building predictive models for disease control," I corrected him. "I told you I was working with international teams. You told me it sounded boring. You told me I should look into marketing because it pays better." He flinched, the memory of his own words, spoken so casually over so many dinners, returned to strike him. "We were just trying to help," Uncle Mark blurted out. He was standing behind my father. His face flushed a deep red. He looked angry, not at me, but at the situation. He was angry that his worldview had been proven wrong. "We pushed you because we care. We thought you were drifting. A little pressure is good for young people. It builds character. If we hadn't been hard on you, maybe you wouldn't have achieved all this. Maybe you have us to thank for the motivation." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "No, Uncle Mark," I said. "Do not rewrite history. You did not motivate me. You tolerated me. I did this work in spite of your doubts, not because of them. My motivation came from the people dying in the field, not from your lectures about touching rock bottom." Clara was standing slightly behind the group. She had not said a word yet. She was holding her phone in one hand, the screen still glowing with the search results that proved her ignorance. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. She was not afraid of me. She was afraid of the reflection she saw in the mirror I was holding up. "Layla," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. Earlier tonight, by the bar, I told you that you were a burden. I told you to get a data entry job." "I remember," I said. "And the group chat," she continued, the words tumbling out. "The screenshot. You saw that? You saw what I wrote about the name tag?" "I saw it," I said. "I saw you call me a PR problem. I saw you decide that unemployed was the kindest label you could give me." She flinched as if I had slapped her. Tears began to well up in her eyes. Tears of humiliation. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean. I was just trying to manage the image of the family. I didn't know you were. You didn't know I was important?" I finished the sentence for her. "Is that what you're sorry for, Clara? Are you sorry you were cruel? Or are you sorry that you were cruel to someone who turned out to be powerful?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She closed it again, looking down at the floor. "If I were actually unemployed," I said, my voice dropping to a register that forced them to lean in. If I were actually struggling, would your words have been any less terrible? Does a person need to be on the cover of Time magazine to deserve your respect, or is basic dignity reserved only for the people who make you look good? My mother let out a sob. She reached for my hand, but I kept them folded in my lap. "Oh, Layla, don't be like that," she cried. "We are your family. We love you. We are so proud of you. Look at you. My daughter. The person of the year. We have to celebrate. We have to tell everyone." She turned to the room, lifting her arms as if to start a parade. "Everyone, did you see? That is my daughter. That is Layla." "Stop," I said. It was not a shout. It was a command. My mother froze. "Do not do that," I said. "Do not claim this. You do not get to take credit for the harvest when you spent 20 years complaining about the seeds." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I stood to my full height. I was wearing a simple dress, not a power suit, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I looked at the circle of faces around me. I saw my aunt, who wanted me to wrap gifts. I saw my uncle, who wanted me to flip burgers. I saw my cousin, who wanted me to be her sidekick. "I am not a trophy for you to place on your mantle next to Clara's debate awards," I said. "And I am not a cautionary tale for you to use to scare your children. I am a scientist. I do work that is difficult and messy and often terrifying. I do not do it for applause, and I certainly do not do it so you can brag to your bridge club." "We just want to be part of your life," my father said, his voice breaking. "We want to understand." "Then you have a lot of reading to do," I said. "The articles are online. The papers are published. If you want to know who I am, read the work. Do not ask me to summarize it for you over dessert, because you are too lazy to learn the vocabulary." I reached down and picked up my clutch purse. "I am going to leave now," I said. "I have a call with my team in Geneva in 40 minutes. We are tracking a new vector, and unlike this dinner, that actually matters." "You are leaving?" my mother asked, horrified. "But the night is just starting. Everyone wants to talk to you. People are lining up." I looked past her. Indeed, the rest of the room was hovering, waiting for the signal to approach. I saw the hungry look in their eyes, the desire to be close to the fame, to get a selfie, to say they knew me when— "I am not a celebrity," I said. "I am not here to sign autographs. I came to the reunion because I wanted to see if anything had changed. I wanted to see if you could see me without a magazine cover telling you where to look." I looked at the overturned name tag on the table. "I got my answer," I said. "Layla, please," Clara said, stepping forward. She looked desperate. "Don't go like this. Let us fix it. Let us make it right. We can change the slide. We can announce it properly." "You cannot fix this with a slide, Clara," I said. "You cannot fix a lifetime of dismissal with one evening of apology." I took a step back, creating a physical gap between myself and the family unit. "I am setting a new boundary," I said, addressing all of them. "I will no longer sit at tables where I am the punchline. I will no longer apologize for my silence. If you want to be in my life, you will meet me as an equal. You will respect my work, not just the accolades it brings. And until you can do that, until you can look at me without calculating my value, I will be loving you from a distance." "From a distance?" my mother whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means I will not be at Thanksgiving this year," I said. "It means I will not be in the group chat listening to you debate my employment status. It means I am taking my time back." I looked at Uncle Mark. "You were right about one thing. Uncle Mark," I said. "You said the younger generation needs to learn independence. You were absolutely right. I am declaring mine." I turned away from them. I began to walk toward the exit. The room parted for me. The guests who had been laughing at me an hour ago now stared with a mixture of awe and shame. I did not make eye contact. I walked with my head high, my pace steady. I heard my mother calling my name, a frantic, pleading sound, but I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked past the registration table where the guest book lay open. I walked past the poster board with the family tree. I walked out of the double doors and into the cool night air of the hotel lobby. The silence of the lobby was beautiful. It was clean. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of rain and city exhaust. But to me, it tasted like freedom. I had not screamed. I had not thrown a drink. I had not made a scene. I had simply told the truth. I had stripped them of the power to define me. They could no longer tell the story of Layla the failure. That story was dead. They would have to find a new story to tell. And for the first time in my life, I did not care what it was. I had my own story now, and it was being read by the entire world. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Sarah at Time. The broadcast numbers are coming in. 20 million viewers. The donation link for Aurora has already crashed the server twice. We are raising millions. Layla, millions. I smiled. I walked out the automatic doors to the valet stand. I handed the attendant my ticket. "Rough night?" he asked, seeing the look on my face. "No," I said, looking back at the hotel where my family was likely still standing in the wreckage of their assumptions. "Actually, it was the best night of my life." "Going home?" he asked. "No," I said. "I am going to work." The valet brought my car around. It was a practical sedan. 4 years old. I got in. I tossed the clutch on the passenger seat. I started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I checked the rearview mirror. I half expected to see them running out the doors, chasing after me. But the doors remained closed. They were stuck inside, trapped in the banquet hall with their cold coffee and their shattered narratives. I merged onto the highway, heading toward the city lights. The data was waiting. The world was waiting. And for the first time, I was driving toward it with nothing holding me back. The studio lights in New York City were brighter than I expected. They were hot, white, and unforgiving, designed to illuminate every pore and every micro-expression for an audience of millions. I sat in a leather chair across from the host, a woman whose face I had watched on the news since I was a child. The set was glass and steel, a backdrop of the Manhattan skyline visible through the window behind us. It was a long way from the beige banquet hall of the Miles family reunion. It had been 48 hours since I walked out of that hotel. I had not spoken to my parents since. I had boarded a train the next morning, leaving the suburbs and the whispers behind, trading them for the anonymity and the electricity of the city. "We are back in 30 seconds, the stage manager said, his voice counting down in my earpiece. I took a breath. I smoothed the fabric of my trousers. I was not nervous. Nervousness comes from uncertainty, and I was no longer uncertain about who I was. "And we are live," the host said, turning to the camera with professional ease. "We are back with Layla Miles. The woman Time magazine has just named Person of the Year, Layla." Before the break, we talked about the technology. We talked about the algorithm that has saved countless lives in the developing world. But I want to pivot to something more personal. She leaned forward, her expression softening into practiced empathy. "You mentioned that for years. You worked in total obscurity. You did not publish op-eds. You did not seek fame. In a world that is obsessed with personal branding, you chose silence. What was the hardest part of that journey? Was it the isolation?" I looked at her, then I looked past her, into the black lens of camera 2. I knew that somewhere in a quiet living room in New Jersey, a television was on. I knew my mother and father were sitting on their floral sofa. I knew Clara was likely there too, watching with the kind of morbid fascination one has for a car crash. "The hardest part was not the work," I said. My voice was steady, magnified by the studio acoustics. "The work is logical. Data makes sense. If you treat a virus with the right protocol, it retreats. The hardest part was accepting that the people closest to me often understood me the least." The host nodded slowly, inviting me to continue. "We live in a culture that prioritizes the packaging over the product," I said. "We are taught that success looks a certain way. It looks like a corner office. It looks like a title on a business card. It looks like a post on social media with 1,000 likes. And if your life does not look like that, People assume it is empty. I paused. I thought about the name tag, unemployed. I spent years being defined by what I was not. I continued. I was not a manager. I was not a director. I was not a wife. To the people who supposedly loved me, those missing labels meant I was broken. They looked at me and saw a void. They did not know that while they were pitying me for having an empty calendar, I was filling cargo planes with vaccines. I saw the host's eyes widen slightly. This was not the standard humble brag answer she was used to. This was raw. It must be vindicating, she said, to have this cover, to show them. It is not vindication, I corrected her gently. It is just data, but it is a tragedy. Really. It is a tragedy that I had to win a global award for my own family to realize I was a capable human being. It shouldn't take a magazine cover to earn basic respect from your relatives. I shifted in my chair and looked directly into the camera lens. I imagined I was looking into my mother's eyes. If you are watching this, I said, speaking to the millions, but really speaking to 5 people. If you have someone in your life who is quiet, who is taking a different path, who isn't posting their every move on the internet, do not assume they are lost. If you call someone useless just because you do not understand their language, that is not a reflection of their value. It is a reflection of your own limited data set. You are not looking at enough data. In the living room in New Jersey, the silence was absolute. My mother let out a long, shuddering breath. She looked at my father. The television cast a blue flicker over their faces, highlighting the lines of age and regret. She is right, my mother whispered. Her voice was thin, stripped of all its usual social armor. She is right. Bob, I didn't care what she was doing. I really didn't. I just wanted to know if I could tell the neighbors about it. I just wanted something to show off. My father did not answer. He just stared at the screen, watching his daughter command the attention of the nation, realizing that he had spent 30 years interrupting her. We missed it, he said hoarsely. We missed the whole thing. She was becoming a giant, and we were treating her like a child. Back in the studio, the interview was wrapping up. The host thanked me, shaking my hand with a grip that was significantly firmer than the one she had offered before the segment began. Thank you. Layla Miles. A remarkable story. The lights dimmed. The segment ended. I walked backstage to the green room. I picked up my phone. It was vibrating so hard it was almost dancing across the table. The screen was a blur of notifications. There were hundreds of messages. Clara. Layla. I am watching. I am crying. I feel like such a fool. Please call me. Uncle Mark. You really gave it to us. Huh? Look, I respect it. You are tough. Let's grab a beer sometime. My treat. Aunt Susan. I am so sorry about the name tag. I honestly thought I was helping. Please forgive me. Cousin Jessica. OMG, Layla. Person of the year. That is insane. We need to take a selfie next time I'm in the city. I scrolled through them. The apologies were frantic. They were terrified. They were the apologies of people who realized they had bet on the wrong horse and were now scrambling to change their tickets. They wanted to be close to the light. They wanted to be able to say, yes, I know her. We are close. I texted her just now. I did not reply to Clara. I did not reply to Mark. I did not reply to Susan. I deleted the thread. Then, I saw a message from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was from Emily, the young cousin at the reunion who had asked me if I had tried dog walking. Emily, I am watching the interview. I am an art major, and everyone in the family tells me it is a waste of time. They tell me to be like Clara. Thank you for saying what you said. It made me feel like I can breathe. I stopped. I smiled. I typed a reply. Keep breathing, Emily, and keep painting. The world needs art just as much as it needs code. Don't let them edit you. I put the phone away. That was the only bridge I needed to build. I left the studio and walked out into the cool night air of Midtown Manhattan. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of my hotel. But when I got to the room, I did not go to sleep. I did not turn on the TV to watch the pundits discuss my appearance. I opened my laptop. The familiar hum of the processor greeted me. I logged into the secure server of the Aurora Impact Lab. The dashboard filled the screen. It was a map of the world, dotted with thousands of points of light, red dots for danger zones, yellow dots for warnings, and green dots for safe zones, areas where the intervention had worked, where the spread had stopped, where people were sleeping safely in their beds because we had seen the storm coming. I watched the map update in real time. A cluster in Jakarta turned from yellow to green. A notification popped up. Supply chain restored in Sector 7. 0 new cases reported in 48 hours. I took a deep breath. This was it. This was the only applause that mattered. My family could have their reunion. They could have their titles and their awards and their slideshows. They could tell their stories about who was winning and who was losing. They could sit in their banquet halls and judge the world by the size of a name tag. I had the green dots. I watched another one appear, a tiny pinprick of light in the darkness of the Amazon. Another village safe, another life protected. I traced the light with my finger on the screen. The revenge was not in the interview. The revenge was not in their apologies. The revenge was in the work. It was in the undeniable, mathematical proof that I had built something that mattered. I did not need them to understand it for it to be true. I closed the laptop, leaving the map running in the background. A silent constellation of my own making. I was Layla Miles. I was the person of the year. But more importantly, I was the person who knew exactly where she was going. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet room, or maybe while you are working on your own invisible empire? Please comment below and let's share our stories. If you enjoyed Layla's journey, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button so this video can reach more people who need to hear that their worth is not defined by a label. See you in the next story.